Before we begin, I would like to point out that it should be fairly uncontroversial at this point to refer to Donald Trump, Dominic Cummings and his little puppet Boris Johnson as far right. You'd be silly to think otherwise. We have Donald Trump sharing tweets of people protesting for white power. We have many of Cummings' own associates acknowledging the far-right beliefs underpinning his ideology.
He's ideologically very, very right-wing, and the fact that he doesn't usually talk about that is him being strategic and thoughtful about how to win the electorate in any given moment.
And Boris Johnson isn't afraid to announce his ignorant white supremacist leanings as he arcs back to a return of colonialism when he wrote, "The best fate for Africa would be if the old colonial powers, all their citizens, scrambled once again in her direction, on the understanding that this time they will not be asked to feel guilty." Secondly, I'm not a trained psychologist, but with this video my main aim is to start a discussion on the morality of allowing cold-hearted and power-hungry narcissists into positions of power. I won't be the first to label any of my subjects in this video, individuals or groups, as narcissistic or psychopathic. Bandy Lee isn't the only trained psychologist calling out the dangerous case of Donald Trump on social media. Here's another more explicit example from psychotherapist Nick Carmody. Psychopaths, Trump, are extremely skilled at manipulating people to think that the sociopath psychopath is being victimized, even when simultaneously engaging in acts of predation. It's not the art of the deal, it's the art of the gaslight mindfuck. And then we have Donald's own niece, Mary L. Trump, who also happens to be a psychologist. In an already best-selling book, pending attempts to stop its release by Trump's younger brother Robert, cancel culture anyone? Mary writes, "A case could be made for antisocial personality disorder. He may have a long undiagnosed learning disability that for decades has interfered with his ability to process information. Donald requires division. It is the only way he knows how to survive. My grandfather ensured that decades ago when he turned his children against each other. But he can never escape the fact that he is, and always will be, a terrified little boy." Here in the UK we have many assertions of the psychopathy of our Prime Minister, Dominic Cummings, by many of his own peers, including ex-Prime Minister David Cameron and this unnamed Tory MP, who says, "I'm not sure that Boris read the small print of the Cummings plan. This is the ultimate proof that one is a charlatan and the other is a psychopath." The charlatan referred to here would be our Prime Minister's assistant, Boris Johnson. Among others, we also have one of Boris's fellow Oxford University associates, Tory Toby Young, who back in 1985 described the Oxford Union, of which Boris was president, that it was lucky the union existed, that in an environment as full of ruthless sociopathic people as Oxford, there should be an institution that sucks them all in, contains all their willful energy, and grants them power only over each other. The problem now is, their sociopathy is contained within the Houses of Parliament, which now grants them the power over each and every one of us. So let's get into these behaviours. You may have heard me use the term gaslight a lot recently, and wondering like I did a year ago, what the fuck is a gaslight? Well, the term comes from a 1940s film by the same name, in which Ingrid Bergman is made to feel like she is losing her mind due to the insidious manipulations of her husband. He keeps changing the strength of the gaslight, making his wife question her own reality.
Where is your husband now? Where's he gone?
He has taken a studio where he can work on his composing. He can't work in this house. He has to have it quiet.
Tell me, is there anyone else in the house now except us and Elizabeth?
No, why?
The gas just went down.
You saw that too?
Why, yes.
Oh, then it really happens. I thought I imagined it.
It only means that someone else has turned it on.
No. I thought that too, but every night I've been all over the house. There's never been another light turned on. At last I can tell this to someone. Now, every night when my husband goes out,
The light goes down.
Gaslighting is a term that seems to be having a modern-day resurgence due to the technique's prolific use in today's political landscape. It's used in society by organisations and individuals using numerous techniques, leaving society polarised as we increasingly struggle to collectively agree on the reality in front of us, allowing the power-hungry to take advantage of the chaos they create. First, some bait needs to be laid. In the film, the bait could either be a change in the strength of the gaslight, a painting taken off the wall.
The little picture has been taken down. Who took it down? Why has it been taken down?
Why indeed? Why was it taken down before? Will you please get it from wherever you've hidden it and put it back in its place?
But I haven't hidden it.
Or persuading his victim that she may have inherited her mother's fictional madness.
Remember?
Yes, you're right. That's when it began.
Yes.
I can see you still, standing there and saying, look at this letter, and staring at nothing.
What?
You had nothing in your hand.
What?
I was staggered, but I didn't know then how much reason I had to be.
I don't know. What reason?
I didn't know then about your mother.
What about my mother?
Your mother was mad.
Oh, Gregory.
She died in an asylum when you were a year old.
That's not true.
Or in other words, the bait is the use of toxic behaviours like contradiction, denial, misdirection, and lies, amongst many others. So the gaslight is fulfilled once the bait is taken, and the over-the-top reaction is performed. You can liken that reaction to a fish thrashing round on the hook after it's taken a bite. So let's take a closer look at the different methods of laying the bait. Contradiction is a behaviour that our politicians are doing all the time. Here's an example of Trump flip-flopping on the issue of the Confederate flag. 4 years ago, he said it should be put in a museum.
I think it probably does, and I think they should put it in the museum, let it go, respect whatever it is that you have to respect because it was a point in time, and put it in a museum, but I would take it down, yes.
Today, Trump is pandering to the far right by not only contradicting his earlier views on the Confederate flag by criticising the ban at NASCAR events, but also attacking the only black driver, Bubba Wallace, whose colleagues found a noose hanging in his garage. Yet bizarrely, Trump was demanding that Wallace had to apologise for the experience.
Instead, the president is blatantly sowing racial divisions as a campaign strategy and embracing the Confederate flag. Just look at his tweet today. This is what he said. Has Bubba Wallace apologized to all of those great NASCAR drivers and officials who came to his aid, stood by his side, and were willing to sacrifice everything for him, only to find out that the whole thing was just another hoax? That and flag decision, that means NASCAR's decision to pull down Confederate flag imagery, has caused lowest ratings ever. So he's going after the only black driver in NASCAR here. Bubba Wallace, to be clear, did not report this news. He didn't see the news, but it was hanging in his garage stall at Talladega. And so when something like that happens in the stall of the only black NASCAR driver, it's cause for alarm.
It's kind of like the time he paid for newspaper adverts calling for the death penalty for the wrongly convicted Central Park 5. Only teenagers at the time. The charges against them were dismissed in 2002 after another man confessed, and they say that their earlier confessions were as a result of police coercion. This and the Bubba Wallace attack are examples of another classic pathological behaviour, victim blaming. Moving to the UK, in his article for the Byline Times, Dr. Andrew Corbett, a former Royal Navy Trident submarine commander, asserts that from the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, the government has continually contradicted itself over everything from participation in the EU's collaborative effort to procure intensive care ventilators, to Dominic Cummings' family outing to Bernard Castle during lockdown on his wife's birthday, breaking his own lockdown rules. Former editor at the Daily Telegraph, Max Hastings, points to Johnson's willingness to tell any audience whatever he thinks most likely to please, heedless of the inevitability of its contradiction an hour later. When a power-hungry man is only interested in becoming head of state to soothe his narcissistic desires, it's easy to understand why they contradict themselves so often. As Dominic Cummings would say, they are merely gestures without movement. So what might a psychopath do when their contradictions are called out? To start off with, they might try to minimize the issue. Trump minimized the threat of the early stages of COVID by claiming, "It's just one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine," he said. This attempt to play down a very serious pandemic is probably the main reason why America has one of the worst death rates in the world. Then there's the way he responded to the infamous "grab 'em by the pussy" recording, dismissing it as locker room talk, which is really quite brazen when you think about it. Not only has he got at least 25 women making sexual misconduct allegations against him, he has a history of walking into the girls' locker rooms at the Miss Teen USA and Miss Universe competitions he owns, while 15 to 16-year-old girls change in preparation for the pageant.
There's the woman who sat next to him on the plane, a People magazine reporter, a contestant on The Apprentice, and a former Miss Arizona who described Trump's behavior backstage at the Miss USA pageant.
He just came strolling right in. There was no second to put a robe on or any sort of clothing or anything. Some girls were topless, other girls were naked.
Okay. Sounds bad. But Mr. Trump, do you have a response?
Lies, lies. No witnesses, no nothing. All big lies.
Okay, lies. All lies, he says. Was there anyone at all backstage at this pageant who could corroborate her story?
I'll go backstage before a show.
Yes.
And everyone's getting dressed and ready and everything else. And I'm allowed to go in because I'm the owner of the pageant and therefore I'm inspecting it. So they're standing there with no clothes. Is everybody okay? And you see these incredible looking women. And so I sort of get away with things like that.
Look, folks. What are you going to do? It's a classic case of she said, he said, hell yeah.
This introduces us to another toxic behavior, the misdirection.
You called what you said locker room banter. You described kissing women without consent, grabbing their genitals. That is sexual assault. You bragged that you have sexually assaulted women. Do you understand that?
No, I didn't say that at all. I don't think you understood what was said. This was locker room talk. I'm not proud of it. I apologize to my family. I apologize to the American people. Certainly I'm not proud of it, but this is locker room talk. You know, when we have a world where you have ISIS chopping off heads, where you have, and frankly, drowning people in steel cages, where you have wars and horrible, horrible sights all over, where you have so many bad things happening. This is like medieval times. We haven't seen anything like this, the carnage all over the world. And they look and they see. Can you imagine the people that are frankly doing so well against us with ISIS, and they look at our country and they see what's going on? Yes, I'm very embarrassed by it. I hate it, but it's locker room talk, and it's one of those things. I will knock the hell out of ISIS. We're going to defeat ISIS. ISIS happened a number of years ago in a vacuum that was left because of bad judgment, and I will tell you, I will take care of ISIS,
so Mr.
and
Trump,
we should get on to much more important things and much bigger things.
Just for the record, though, are you saying that what you said on that bus 11 years ago, that you did not actually kiss women without consent or grope women without consent?
I have great respect for women. Nobody has more respect for women than I do.
So for the record, you're saying you never did that?
I said things that, frankly, you hear these things are said. And I was embarrassed by it, but I have tremendous respect for women.
Have you ever done those things?
Women have respect for me. And I will tell you, no, I have not. And I will tell you that I'm going to make our country safe. We're going to have borders in our country, which we don't have now.
Ignore my sexual abuse crimes because there are people chopping off actual heads on the other side of the world. Cool. Well, tomorrow I'm going to go rob a bank. I'll obviously get away with it because I'm doing such important work exposing these psychopaths in government. When misdirection fails, they may become very vague. Boris excels at this, often using Latin to deflect from the fact he's completely unprepared. So here's Trump's incredibly vague plan for the next 8 weeks.
Things that nobody has even contemplated, thought about, thought possible, and things that we're going to get done, and we have gotten done. We've started in most cases, but it's going to be a very exciting 8 weeks. A 8 weeks, like I think, Mike, we can honestly say nobody's ever going to see 8 weeks like we're going to have, because we really have. We're taking on immigration, taking on education, we're taking on so many aspects of things that people were hopelessly tied up in knots in Congress. They've been working on some of these things for 25, 30 years. It wasn't happening. But you'll see levels of detail, and you'll see levels of thought that a lot of people believe very strongly we didn't have in this country. We're going to get things done. We're going to get things done that they've wanted to see done for a long, long time. So I think we'll start sometime on Tuesday. We'll be discussing our one plan on suburbia, but that's one of many, many different plans. Then we're going into the world of immigration, the world of education. We're going into the world of healthcare, very complete healthcare. And we have a lot of very exciting things to discuss. But cutting of regulation has been really something that I felt we could do, and we could do fairly easily. Nothing's easy in this country.
And if being vague doesn't work, here's an extreme case by the all-round weirdo Matt Hancock, who decides to try talking utter gibberish.
Great steps for that. In relation to tourism, they are subject to social distancing as well. So there are two things we do. First of all, we mitigate the risk as much as possible, but ultimately, even when you mitigate risk, by not having social distancing, that increases significantly the risk of social distancing. And we're simply not at a point that we can do that for theatres, nor will we be for some time, nor are we across vast swathes of almost the whole of the rest of the economy.
Imagine yourself talking that much nonsense tomorrow at work. What do you think would happen to you? When all else fails, just deny everything, as Johnson did when he used the classic blame projection when he caused offence to hospital staff, as he put sole responsibility on them for his own negligent response to the COVID pandemic.
Speaker, on Monday, when asked why care home deaths had been so high, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Too many care homes didn't really follow the procedures in the way that they could have. That's caused huge offence to frontline care workers. It's now been 48 hours. Will the Prime Minister apologise to care workers?"
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and the last thing I want to do is to blame care workers for what has happened, or for any of them to think that I was blaming them.
This inability to properly apologise or to take responsibility for one's own actions comes from a psychopath's lack of remorse or guilt. Boris sums up many of these behaviours so far during his reaction to being played the Guppy phone call.
We did have a serious embarrassment with Boris when he was in Brussels, when one fine morning, on my desk along with a post, I find a tape and a note from a reader who's saying, what are you as Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Telegraph proposing to do about one of your correspondents, Boris Johnson, having this conversation with Darius Guppy, a convicted fraudster?
The tape was a recording of Guppy telephoning to ask Johnson to find the home address of an inquisitive journalist whom Guppy wanted to scare off.
Watch as Johnson denies and minimises his way through the call, laughing as if it was all just one big joke.
But I am telling you something, Boris. This guy has got my blood up, all right? And there is nothing which I won't do to get my revenge. It's as simple as that.
How badly are you going to hurt this guy?
Not badly at all. He will not have a broken limb or broken arm, and he will not be put into intensive care or anything like that. He'll probably get a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib or something like that. Nothing which you didn't suffer in rugby, okay? That you'll get scared, and that's what I want him to do.
Okay, Terry, I said I'll do it. Don't worry.
Boris, I really mean it. I love you.
Yes. Taken out of context, that conversation could indeed seem embarrassing.
It's completely in context. What do you feel hearing it again now, because you were laughing?
Well, obviously I feel indignation that people take my private phone calls. That's what I feel.
The indignation comment at the end speaks volumes. Boris feels it is him that is being treated unfairly, without a single regard for the journalist he was conspiring to get assaulted. More projection from Johnson, and a sense of entitlement which we will come to later. Pathological lying is one of the 20 psychopathic traits on the Hare checklist. I'm sure it will come to no surprise to anyone that Donald Trump made almost 20,000 misleading or outright false claims within 1,200 days. I believe the most damning of his lies is the one he made recently concerning Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Prince Andrew.
The point is widespread connections between Trump and Epstein. Now, Donald Trump was asked about Maxwell on Tuesday. and Trump wished her well, which is a really weird thing to say about an alleged sex trafficker, given the number of alleged victims. But Trump also mentioned something about Prince Andrew, which you may find interesting. So let's take a look at that clip.
Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, and a lot of people want to know if she's going to turn in powerful people. And I know you've talked in the past about Prince Andrew, and you've criticized Bill Clinton's behavior. I'm wondering, do you feel that she's going to turn in powerful men? How do you see that working out?
I don't know. I haven't really been following it too much. I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is. I don't know the situation with Prince Andrew. Just don't know. Not aware of it.
So a lot of people are focusing on Trump saying he wishes her well. Arguably a wild thing to say, given that Ghislaine Maxwell is accused of grooming and trafficking in young girls and has left so many alleged victims in her wake. But the thing about, and we're going to talk about wishing her well in a moment, but the thing about Prince Andrew is particularly interesting because once again, Trump claims total ignorance. Prince Andrew and Epstein, I don't know anything about that. But we have video. Check out this video from February of 2015. This is when Donald Trump was getting ready to run for president. In this clip, he says he's about 80% certain he's going to run for president. And it sure seemed like Trump knew a lot about Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew in this clip. Take a look.
You raised the question of Jeffrey Epstein in your remarks about in the Q&A.
Well, I think he's got a problem. I mean,
what do you think the problem will be?
I don't know, but that island was really a cesspool. There's no question about it. Just ask Prince Andrew. He'll tell you about it. The island was an absolute cesspool. So,
the Clintons are friends
and he's
of
been
yours,
there
right?
for many times.
The Clintons are friends.
Well, I can't say friends, but I know
You're friendly. You know them.
They play at my clubs a lot. I have clubs, and everybody likes to play at my clubs.
Trump knows about the island, and he says Prince Andrew specifically is the guy you want to talk to. And he even kind of gives a weird kind of knowing look to one of the people sitting at that desk on camera. Says Prince Andrew can tell you about it.
All credit to David Pakman for that find. The lies from Boris Johnson are arguably just as endless. From lying about something so trivial as bendy bananas during the Brexit debate, to the more serious allegation that it was drunk football fans who were responsible for the Hillsborough tragedy. Moving to the master manipulator, propagandist and strategist Dominic Cummings, he was responsible for the many lies that came from the EU Leave campaign. The bogus claim of an extra $350 million for our NHS, and a race-baiting and completely false assertion of a mass migration of Turks to the UK.
This was a method of communication, of propaganda, which was completely careless of the truth, but which served a political, ideological purpose. Dominic Cummings became a past master at it.
These lies were doubly insidious as they were targeted to those most likely to be influenced through the Orwellian data mining machinery of Cambridge Analytica.
That data had been used in order to predict people's behavior so that individuals could be manipulated. And I say manipulated instead of persuaded because not everyone was persuaded to sign up to vote and come to the polls and care about politics and engage in important issues. Some people were unfortunately persuaded to not go to the polls and to inherently have a distrust in politics.
How did Cambridge Analytica use PSYOPs, or psychological operations? This is essentially a form of modern-day warfare.
Psychological operations means that you use behavioral science in order to understand how people make their decisions, how they can be persuaded. And that was Cambridge Analytica's strategy. So what they did was work with behavioral, clinical, and experimental psychologists in order to put together surveys that tested how people saw the world, how they made their decisions every day. And when you have that type of information, you can target specific communications just all the way down to an individual or to specific groups of people that quote unquote change their behavior or convince them to take an action that they might have not taken without that ad.
Tell us about the role that you played in the Brexit referendum.
So Cambridge Analytica was working with Leave EU for a period of time in order to start to analyze data to figure out who in the United Kingdom would be persuaded to vote to leave. And This was an initial piece of data work using UK Independence Party data and a survey that asked people about why they would want to leave or not. And Cambridge Analytica found quite a few different groups of people who would be interested in voting to leave and identified those people, talked about their psychographics and what type of messaging would persuade them. And then that was delivered to Leave EU, which, whether they used that knowledge fully or not, they created their own data company in order to have a full national campaign that, as we know now, used disinformation, abused data laws, and even contravened electoral spending regulations. The United Kingdom was really, their democracy was sold to the highest bidder, and unfortunately that highest bidder was Aaron Banks.
So as you've just heard, these lies were specifically targeted in order to manipulate society. Populations have been studied through the data we freely give via our social media platforms. Those who are deemed most likely to be persuaded by certain arguments are targeted. With the election of the likes of Trump, Boris and Cummings as beneficiaries from this bespoke targeting of lies, corruption and nepotism obviously follow. And while they're in charge of the Brexit and COVID chaos, they're having their cake and eating it. It is these behaviours mentioned, amongst others, that are used as bait for a gaslight. This societal gaslighting process is exacerbated even more directly by social media companies like Facebook, who are driving people towards self-reinforcing echo chambers of extremism, accelerating the polarisation of our societies. Even the mainstream media getting on the act by promoting specifically divisive figures like Piers Morgan, and further stoke up those divisions about the guy by begging the question, should he be fired, expecting a polarised 50-50 split, much like the Brexit referendum.
Way to get rid of me. Let me tell you what you've done. You've helped me get a pay rise. So, cheers. Cheers, everybody.
And this increase in manufactured distrust of our media is borne out by the most recent data. Narcissism is one of the biggest drivers of people displaying these toxic behaviours. I love this description of a narcissist by Dr. Romani.
Before, the narcissist is a petty tyrant and a spoiled child that is angry that someone is getting the best of them. They have to win. Narcissists have to win.
It sounds just like Mary Trump's description of her uncle from earlier. Here's an example of Trump displaying his narcissism as he tells us all about the great friends he has.
Marco Rubio is a very, very good friend of mine. Tom Brady's a friend of mine. My friend Elton John. George Steinbrenner was a good friend of mine.
Howard Stern was a friend of mine.
We've been friends for a long time. A friend of mine is a great manufacturer. A friend of mine is a great excavator. I have a friend who builds plants. I have friends that are reporters. A friend of mine who's in law enforcement. My best friends have become fire marshals.
The generals have become very good friends of mine.
My biker friends. A friend who's a doctor. A friend who's a farmer. I know the insurance companies. They're friends of mine. I have many friends that are liberal, and I think they're wonderful people. I have friends that are wonderful business people. I have friends that are very wealthy people. Friends of mine go bankrupt. I have many, many friends who are women, and I have some very smart friends who don't agree with me. I have a friend who's a very smart guy and a very streetwise guy. A friend of mine, he's a world champion. A friend of mine who happens to be a great, great athlete. He happens to be African American. And I have a friend, big guy, one of the biggest in the world. I have a friend, he's a very, very substantial guy. Tough cookies. I better not mention their names, and two of them are friends of mine. Friends also that have become addicted to drugs. My friend, he was my friend. He passed away, he was my friend. I have a friend every year he goes to Paris. I have friends that won't go to France. Friends that live in California. So many friends in New Hampshire. A lot of good friends out in Iowa. Friends that live in Texas. Friends in Wisconsin. I have friends that love to go to their church. I have friends that frankly aren't Christian. I have many Jewish friends. I have many friends that are Muslim. Many Chinese friends. Friends in Saudi Arabia. Friends in Mexico. Friends in Japan. So many friends in Turkey. Many friends in South Korea. I have so many friends from this area. Friends that live all over the place. I have no friends as far as I'm concerned. I have no friends as far as I'm concerned.
And we have this description of Johnson's narcissistic traits from his former editor at the Daily Telegraph, Max Hastings. While he is a brilliant entertainer, Hastings wrote, he is unfit for national office, because it seems he cares for no interest save his own fame and gratification. Due to a narcissist's need for their egos to be massaged, they can develop a false superiority complex. Here's what our unelected Prime Minister Dom Cummings' castle-owning father-in-law thinks about the overimportance of his own genes and family line.
And therefore, in general, high beings in the tree of life have quality and have skills, and they get wonderful degrees at university, and if they marry each other, that gets them better again.
So you wouldn't have minded if one of your children had met someone from a lower socio-economic group who was intelligent and talented and...
Intelligence and talent is lovely, but I want parents and grandparents who've had hands-on success, running their battles well and proving they're wonderful because one is the subject of one's genes, and I think I like the idea of them being successful genes and winning through to successful puppies.
Some things haven't been in genes though, have there? Like there's been some outstanding people and geniuses who've been like first generation.
No, they aren't. Very few first generation geniuses.
Very few, but there's still few.
Like which?
Would they have been allowed?
I think that's what I mean.
Of course there are.
You're saying the very few.
Normally, you think of Bertrand Russell, for instance. Okay, ancient family, Dukes of Bedford, Wittgenstein, ancient.
Here's the perfect example of Trump's false superiority complex.
Nobody can do it like me. Nobody. Nobody can do it like me. Honestly.
Nobody's stronger than me.
Nobody has better toys than I do.
There's nobody bigger or better at the military than I am.
Nobody loves the Bible more than I do.
Nobody builds walls better than me.
Nobody's better to people with disabilities than me. Nobody's fighting for the veterans like I'm fighting for the veterans.
There's nobody that's done so much for equality as I have.
There's nobody more pro-Israel than I am. There's nobody more conservative than me. There's nobody that respects women more than I do. Nobody would be tougher on ISIS than Donald Trump.
There's nobody's ever had crowds like Trump has had.
There's nobody that understands the horror of nuclear better than me. Nobody even understands it but me. It's called devaluation, the sale of the uranium that nobody knows what it means. I know what it means. Nobody knows more about trade than me. Nobody knows the game better than I do. Nobody in the history of this country has ever known so much about infrastructure as Donald Trump.
I know the H-1B, I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me.
Nobody knows politicians better than I do.
Nobody knows more about taxes than I do.
Nobody knows more about debt than I do. Nobody knows the system better than me.
This false superiority complex brings a sense of entitlement, noted early on for Johnson when in 1982, when he was at the age of 17, his housemaster Martin Hammond wrote, "I think he honestly believes it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation which binds everyone else." This entitlement leads to a lack of morality and rule-breaking. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled that Johnson and his government had misled the Queen in the illegal proroguing of Parliament.
That the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void, and of no effect. This means that the order in Council to which it led was also unlawful, void, and of no effect, and should be quashed. This means that when the Royal Commissioners walked into the House of Lords, it was as if they had walked in with a blank sheet of paper. The prorogation was also void and of no effect. Parliament has not been prorogued. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices.
And a whole list of toxic behaviours were on full display during the fallout from the Cummings family outing to Barnard Castle, during lockdown, and on his wife's birthday. From the initial ghosting of the issue to the blame projection onto the media, all in an attempt to minimise the blatant hypocrisy displayed by our lockdown rulemaker.
I was trying to weigh up on that Friday night conflicting things between what happens if we're both ill, who's going to look after him, what's the safest way of doing that, is there a way in which I might be able to go back to work the following week if the whole testing system changes, which was being discussed but did not in fact happen. I was trying to weigh all of those things up. Given that, I think that I don't believe that I broke the rules. I think that...
Listen carefully to this next bit, where Cummings subtly deflects from his stonewalling of the issue, and instead, like a true hypocrite, blame projects onto the media, describing how it has left its readers confused. The biting of the tongue at the end tells me he thinks he just accidentally described the gaslight mindfuck in far too much detail.
Breaking the rules, it's that the SPIP and SPIM members last night said that they think you introduced the idea that if your personal circumstances allow, you can do something different from what the simple rules say, and they are very worried that will make it much harder to contain the spread of the disease.
Well, I think that they're right to be worried that the coverage of the last couple of days could encourage people to behave in certain ways. But with great respect to them, they made those comments without knowing what had actually happened, and actually that's one of the reasons why I think now it would have been better to have made this statement earlier. But as it was, well, I didn't, and it would have been better to have done it earlier, for sure, and that would have also, I think, stopped some of those guys being themselves confused by what they read. Beth.
Thank you.
Breaking the rules comes naturally to Cummings. He was summoned to attend a parliamentary committee to give evidence surrounding fake news during the EU referendum. He didn't turn up, was found in contempt with the conclusion that his attitude did not serve the interests of civilised public debate. This guy now runs our country. Yet at the time he was let off with a warning. It's no wonder our leaders feel so entitled when their only punishments are a slap on the wrist. It's becoming increasingly more impossible to hold our leaders, unelected or otherwise, to account. Moving back across the pond, Trump is no different. From setting up fake universities to the more recent corruption scandals with Ukraine and other nations and everything else in between, Trump has had his own fair share of law-breaking adventures. This lack of morality stems from a psychopath's cold-heartedness and a lack of empathy, the kind of characteristic that allows someone to advocate a deport now, appeal later policy during the Windrush scandal, or advocating for herd immunity during the pandemic, knowing this will mean tens of thousands of extra and needless deaths.
You know, perhaps you could sort of take it on the chin, take it all in one go, and allow the disease, as it were, to move through the population.
You can see that with these pathological behaviours, a psychopath would have no problem with the targeted bullying of their colleagues and critics. Priti Patel was known to be involved in such a scandal, where one of her staff members attempted to commit suicide as a result of the bullying she received at work. Sometimes psychopaths get others to do their dirty work. These are referred to by psychologists as flying monkeys. Flying monkeys in the context of narcissistic abuse are those who do the narcissist's bidding. They are those who punish dissenters who dare challenge the narcissist, for they depend upon the narcissist for their own ego satisfaction, and therefore protect the narcissist with as much fervour as they would protect their own ego. Boris wrote about them back in the 1980s, referring to them as stooges. In an essay for the Oxford Myth, a book edited by his sister Rachel, Johnson advised aspiring student politicians to assemble a disciplined and deluded collection of stooges to get out the vote. Lonely girls from the women's colleges who backed their largely male candidates with a porky decisiveness were particularly useful, he wrote. For these young women, machine politics offers human friction and warmth. Johnson added, the tragedy of the stooge is that he wants so much to believe that his relationship with the candidate is special that he shuts out the truth. The terrible art of the candidate is to coddle the self-deception of the stooge. And then we have Michael Gove on his first year of university, admitting that in the first time meeting Boris in the Union Bar, he seemed like a kindly Oxford character, but he was really there like a great basking shark waiting for freshers to swim towards him, Gove told Gimson. I was Boris's stooge. I became a votary of the Boris cult. It's unsurprising Boris later tried to gaslight the issue by minimising his earlier comments. I think my essay remains the locus classicus of the English genre of bogus self-deprecation. You'd be mad to think otherwise. Dominic Cummings and Michael Gove have also been accused of bullying their staff members.
He wrote on his blog that sometimes you need an evil genius to come in. Was that how he saw himself, Dominic Cummings?
Yes, I think he definitely did. I was at one meeting with Michael Gove, and Dominic Cummings, halfway through, stormed into the room wearing no shoes and draped himself over a chair and just sat there whistling to himself and looking at me with complete contempt. It was an attempt to intimidate me.
Allegations of bullying were made against Dominic Cummings and another colleague by a civil servant in the department.
You have direct responsibility for the management of your SPADs.
It was, I understand the case, that the allegations of bullying were found to be unfounded.
Would you call him a bully?
I would, yes. Shouting, losing his temper. I would say that behaviour is reprehensible in the highest degree.
And then Cummings has humiliated a junior member of staff in front of her colleagues by having her escorted from the premises by armed police.
Sajid Javid's aide, Sonia Khan, was called to number 10 after Cummings suspected her of leaking government plans to Philip Hammond.
Sonia Khan was brought in without notice to see Dominic Cummings, and within a matter of minutes was dismissed with an accusation of leaking. There was no process there. She had no ability to defend herself. She was escorted from the building under armed police escort. She was humiliated, essentially, in front of civil servants. And then what followed was a doubling down of that by anonymous briefings from Number 10. So this is clearly bullying behaviour from Dominic Cummings, and I think sent shockwaves across the civil service.
This behaviour from Cummings is known as isolation or ghosting, a term you may be familiar with from dating, also known as stonewalling or the silent treatment. The act of refusing communication, stalling or evading, especially to avoid revealing embarrassing information and escape accountability. Trump displays these ghosting techniques with his treatment of unfriendly journalists during press briefings. And we've also seen Boris adopt the same tactics. Is this considered cancel culture? The media also get in the act by ghosting anti-establishment left-wing parties. If we take the Green Party as an example, they received only a quarter of the media coverage that the Brexit Party got, even though they won 200,000 more votes in total.
The oligarchs have discovered the formula for persuading the poor to vote for the interests of the very rich. And that formula includes massive lying and cheating on an unprecedented scale, mobilizing social media particularly to generate mendacious, manipulative adverts and memes and conspiracy theories in order to swing people round or to turn them off from voting altogether, pushing forward killer clowns like Johnson, like Trump, like Modi, like Bolsonaro, who will do whatever the oligarchs want, but present a sort of almost amusing face to the public, and so we laugh along with them. And then they learn from each other, they teach each other. In fact, very often the same political operatives will hop from one campaign to another, constantly refining the model, refining the formula.
When we look at our current Tory government, they're acting like they've found the formula. And at this current moment in time, it seems like that formula is acting like a psychopath. And New Labour don't absolve themselves of all blame of this, acting as the stooge of the billionaire press.
When you look at the only Labour leader who has succeeded in recent times, Tony Blair, you see someone who has pretty well gone along with the agenda of the billionaire press. I mean, he went to great lengths to butter up Rupert Murdoch, potentially the most dangerous man on earth. The fear, the worry is that he had to do that in order to appease the billionaire press, and that if a Labour leader doesn't do that, they can't succeed. If that is the case, then we have a real big structural, institutional problem, and it is called the media. But it seems to me that in this renewed furious public argument between Blairites and Corbynites, or whatever you want to call them, we see people really arguing in the wrong terms about the wrong things and on the wrong scale. They're looking inward, whereas actually they ought to be looking at the political system as a whole and how we can radically change that. The problem we face at the moment, almost regardless of who is in power, is that we have a very top-down 19th century model of politics. What we need to replace that simple linear top-down political model with is what I call political rewilding, a system which is run and owned by the people.
Reforming or modernising our democracy, as Monbiot is describing here, it would go a long way to fixing the problems caused by the political class, isolating the working classes from society for generations. Thatcher's battles with the unions and the closing down of our manufacturing and mining industries that were imperative to the North's economic survival at the time are examples of this isolation.
The government's election manifesto had been less ambiguous. Thatcher wished to crush the unions. By 84, the Conservatives were ready to take on the traditional vanguard of union might, the miners. Corporal Chief Ian McGregor was pitched against miners leader Arthur Scargill. The fight was on.
As far as we are concerned, we shall do all in our power to resist this closure programme, and we would urge all our members to continue to support union policy, to defend their pit and their jobs.
The stage had been set for Britain's most bitter industrial dispute. For a year, police exercised their new legal powers to stop the practice of mass picketing. In the law courts, the miners were losing the battle. At the pithead, they met force with force. But ultimately, the police and the government had the upper hand. Miners' wives and support groups ensured that those still on strike could feed their families and were not starved back to work. But in the end, determination and food parcels were no match for the government's own determination to quell the trade unions.
This extra financial pressure on some of the lowest earning in society, as they've had their job security ripped from them, has led to an increase in broken families. More broken families means more dysfunctional upbringings, meaning successive populations are much more easily controlled by massaging their egos and playing on their fears.
And they divided people up into different groups, but the group that they focused on was the neurotics. Can you explain who they are and why they decided it functioned best to manipulate those particular personality types?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different personality types, but when somebody is neurotic, it means that you are persuaded by fear-based messaging. And when Cambridge Analytica, the Trump campaign, and the main Trump super PAC, Make America #1, was undertaking their testing, they saw that the most successful use cases of psychological data was to use fear-based messaging and send that to people who are neurotic, people that are emotionally unstable, people who might easily make snap decisions. And that was so successful that they continued to use the rest of the campaign budget, especially for the super PAC, on negative messaging only.
We also have to attend to the short-term crisis that many people in this country now face.
Even though most of us are ill or hungry, we have to be careful with our food. So we try not to eat a lot in one day.
Continued austerity, continued exclusion and marginalisation.
And this defunding of the working classes for at least half a century, while inequality skyrockets, it has left us collectively gaslighted. The past decade of austerity has just ramped up the pressure. And this will lead to the further polarisation of our society, as we fight amongst ourselves in a culture war, instead of seeing it for what it is, manufactured chaos. A power play from the corporate billionaires, a pretend libertarian elite, and their governmental stooges.
So you would say that white supremacist tied publications meet a rigorous standard for fact-checking?
We need not just a change of government, we need a change of political system. We know that just as there is a formula for the oligarchs to take power, there is a formula for defeating them and for ensuring that there's a far more effective and robust democracy than we've ever witnessed anywhere. And I'm beginning to see the first strands of what that formula might be.
I had grand illusions to finish this video off with what I think the counter formula is. But the truth is, at this moment in time, I don't know. But like Monbiot, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. First step, highlight the psychopaths in power, expose their ideology, their plan, and their toxic behaviours. Step 2, subscribe to my channel, join the community, and let's find that counter formula together. Finally, I'll leave you with this quote. In their professional careers, higher functioning sociopaths and psychopaths are nakedly ambitious, shrewdly exploitative, and ruthlessly aggressive. They often maneuver their way to positions of power and status in business, finance, politics, media, and other prominent fields. They attain success at the unethical expense of using and abusing others. Examples may include the business executive who cuts employees' living wage and healthcare for higher profit, the financial advisor who defrauds clients' life savings for unscrupulous investment, the politician who scapegoats and demonizes undesirable groups to incite his following, and the media talking head who shocks and offends to gain notoriety and exposure. Sociopaths and psychopaths achieve their objectives through the relentless, immoral pursuit of power and personal gain, leaving a trail of human suffering and societal damage in their wake.
You were a Democrat, but yet you ended up working for some of the most powerful people from the far right in the United States. Ultimately, how did that happen? In a sense, were you targeted?
That's really why I have 400 pages of a book to explain what happened. I want everyone to know that everybody's vulnerable to being persuaded. Everybody can be targeted. If it happened to me, it could happen to anybody, and it really does on a day-to-day basis. We are not protected today from anything that happened in 2016.
In your book, your narrator's voice almost feels at times perhaps schizophrenic. I feel like you're both extremely smart and savvy, but then at the same time you portray yourself as someone naive and who is in a way a victim who is used. Who is Brittany Kaiser?
It's hard to quantify what happened. All I can explain is what I experience on a day-to-day basis and the way that I view all of that now. I think it's important for people to understand how vulnerable they are. I'm sure there's a lot of really amazing people at Facebook right now that think that moving fast and breaking things was great, and now they're questioning some of the decisions that Mark Zuckerberg is making, decisions that don't protect our democracy. And I bet you they never thought they would be in that position. So it's important for people, as soon as they see something going wrong in their company, to actually start to question it.